Hello, everyone. Hope everybody is doing well. I wanted to make this video to talk about our top urban planning issue, which is Stroads, or also known as arterial roads, street design, whatever you want to talk about it. But it is the foundation that keeps modern urban planning that we are greatly opposed to going. You've probably seen a lot of videos, especially from YouTube channels like Not Just Bikes, about how they're horrible, they're inefficient.
These are what Strongtowns refers to as Stroads, which is a horrible name, and that's intentional because these are horrible places.
They combine the aspects of a road, I guess you can say highway, and a street into one. Not to mention, as a result, they bring a wide variety of inefficiencies. They're very dangerous. They pretty much create a high risk of accidents. Lots of interruptions can happen, and which can make car travel a lot more difficult. In addition, they also divide neighborhoods, reduce connectivity. They reduce the sense of community. They have a very negative impact on the character of a neighborhood. Basically, they fail to do both. They have none of the benefits of a street that's slow moving, that brings the community together, and they don't have a lot of the benefits of actually moving traffic a lot more quickly. However, they were pretty much designed to kind of do the benefits of both. I guess the planners just wanted people to go faster than 20 miles an hour, but in reality, even though the speed limit is 45 miles an hour, people on average go 25 miles an hour on these arterial routes. In addition, they're very dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists because crossing these streets are not only unattractive, but they're pretty dangerous. They have a high fatality risk rate, high injury rate.
Metro's traffic division in Henderson enforcing the right-of-way for a large turkey to cross safely. You would hope people would stop. This was all at the crosswalk at Cashman Middle. Drivers, though, almost turned that turkey into stuffing. It's also part of that effort to remind drivers, be careful, watch out for pedestrians ahead of the holidays. So far this year, 7 children have died while crossing our roads.
As a result, when people don't engage in that mode of travel, they're more likely to be car dependent. This type of route design makes things further apart, which then creates a more and more cycle of car dependency. It's very common to see in these Stroads, you typically will have large surface parking lots in between the Stroad and the non-residential building, particularly commercial, government buildings, and so forth. And a lot of times residential buildings will not face the arterial road. They will face the other direction in its own enclosed, separate subdivision, often walled up and isolated in its own bubble. As a result of Stroads, typically these routes are often 6 to 8 lanes, believe it or not, and they can be 11 lanes in an intersection. Worst of all, very pricey. It is no coincidence that our gas taxes are significantly high in the Las Vegas Valley, costing anywhere between about 20, 30, 40 cents because of the fact to maintain these arterial roads, they require a lot of taxes to keep the system going. However, it is not just the costs and inefficiencies. What hardly anybody seems to be talking about is why do they keep getting built? Well, first, the obvious answer is the codes. You see, the dimensions, the number of lanes required is set by the local jurisdiction, whether it's the county out here or by the city, as a matter of fact. In fact, we have a pattern of streets that it's done really in a national level. I think City Beautiful made a video about that, how there's these arterial roads are typically planned every mile or so, and then every half a mile you have a lower capacity collector route, which is still, believe it or not, a Stroad. Now let me give you some example of Stroads which are highly inefficient. One of them can be Flamingo, which is right next to me, Jones, Rainbow, Tenaya, El Capitan, Blue Diamond, Eastern, whether it is Craig, and the list pretty much goes on. St. Rose, you pretty much get the idea. Now, they don't always have to be laid out in a grid direction. They can also be in planned neighborhoods, such as Summerlin, Green Valley, Anthem, Aliante. The list pretty much goes on. Now, you have to figure out, why do these things get built? How did we get there, as a matter of fact? Well, one of the things is that you have to look back at our old Main Street. As you know, here in Las Vegas, we do have a Main Street. And back in the day, a lot of these main streets used to be 2 lanes. But what happened? Let me tell you one contributing factor to what led to Stroad, and that is traffic lights. Because of traffic lights, what we ended up seeing, as a matter of fact, is once the traffic lights were installed in old traditional areas, it created a line of cars in front of the red light. Later on, the congestion problems led to a lot of these planners to adding another lane, adding a right turn lane, then adding 2 left turn lanes. And then once the streets get wider and the buildings, well, obviously if you have more asphalt, the buildings have to be tall enough to create a more pedestrian-friendly atmosphere. Well, they failed to do that. And as these routes got wider, it discouraged more pedestrian traffic. It created more division in neighborhoods. And as a result, what we saw is more and more car dependency. Traffic lights were obviously one of the large contributing factors to Stroads. Nevertheless, in the last several decades, medians, large landscaped areas in the middle of these arterial routes, were not placed to basically minimize the impact of the Stroads and make it more attractive for pedestrians and cyclists to cross. So, as a result, you can see where we have come to over the last several decades. And by the way, to top it off, as you know, roundabouts, believe it or not, which has been gaining traction in the last couple of decades, has been able to mitigate the effects of Stroads. You can kind of see how Carmel, Indiana looks like, because roundabouts need fewer lanes to move traffic on intersections, and as a result, it created a more pedestrian-friendly landscape. And I'm going to get to that later on in the video. Part of the reason why Stroads get built is that there's a lot of laziness. There's less work to be done by planning departments and developers. Think about it. Originally, when things get built on outward greenfield development, usually, when you look at it, Blue Diamond, Rainbow, back in the day, were originally 2-lane highways or roads, right? And then over time, these areas get developed. But the thing is that they fail to get the transformation that they actually need. Think about it. When you go out to a place like Pahrump, Prim, or even how the Las Vegas Strip used to look like 70 years ago, they used to be pretty much narrow roads with a lot of commercial businesses that got built up over time when those rural areas continue to get transformed over time. Now, the problem is that they wanted to maintain the high speed while they wanted to make sure that people can get in and out of these businesses. However, it created a lot of problems because for pedestrians and a lot of other safety issues driving around, problems began to amount over time. Instead, what they should have done is they had to realize, first of all, that this system was unsustainable and they had to separate from fast-moving traffic. Now, keep in mind these conversions make sense. However, they cost a lot of money initially. Converting them into boulevards that are slow-moving, building an alternative, higher-speed, limited-access route, whether it's a highway, parkway, freeway, or heck, even building a mass transit system, has very high initial costs. Now, despite the fact Las Vegas is one of the most car-dependent areas in the United States, and surprisingly, sadly, it's one of the densest urban areas in the country, believe it or not, it is one of the areas that have one of the lowest per capita of freeway miles than any major metropolitan area in the United States. Pretty shocking. This means that a lot of our traffic flow, a lot of the driving that we do around the Las Vegas area, a lot of our trips that can be about 10 miles, much of it, or actually most of it, can be done on a Stroad. Because building a Stroad initially is often not only easier and cheaper in terms of initial costs, but it's also the fact that developers initially fund Stroads. Let me give you an example. Let's just say if Rainbow Boulevard wants to make an extension on the southwest end of the Las Vegas Valley, because a home builder wants to build a tract housing development. The home builder has to extend that Stroad because it's part of the code. But the Stroad is often funded, the construction, the pavement, is often funded by the developer. However, in terms of improvements, adding traffic lights, maintenance, and so forth, that's often sadly funded by you, the taxpayer. And in the long term, it doesn't provide a fiscal benefit. I think Charles Marone in his organization, Strong Towns, will give you a lot of insight about how these modern planned areas are very fiscally irresponsible. However, let's not forget the fact that Stroads also benefit a lot of special interests. Asphalt pavers, people who depend or desire gated areas, people who want very, very quiet streets, although traditionally planned areas can have them as well. People who want areas that are full of cul-de-sacs, as a matter of fact. Major retailers, particularly big box power centers, are beneficiaries of Stroads. Drive-through fast food businesses benefit greatly. Perhaps the system creates a lot of safety concerns where lawyers, you can see all the billboards everywhere, greatly benefit from it. Let's not forget, these standards really came from the Federal Housing Administration and as well, as far as I researched, the Department of Transportation. Now keep in mind though, that while many of you may disagree with some of the videos I have made about transit use, one thing is clear, is that Stroads is not only the top issue that we face, but it has a very low support for keeping things going. In other words, Stroads are not something that's greatly supported, or people believe that it actually makes sense for us to keep building and maintaining. This along with parking requirements. I hardly heard anybody tell me why we need parking requirements in the first place. So the fact of the matter is that Stroads doesn't have a lot of support, and in fact, if you're a car enthusiast, you can drive fast, but you don't need Stroads to do that, because you really don't drive 45 miles an hour. There are some good news, as I talked in a previous video about how the La Madre Hills plan from the city of Las Vegas has been doing a lot to build outward growth and reducing the effects and the planning of Stroads. Going forward, we have a lot of things to do. There are some Stroad-like areas that you can find in downtown Las Vegas. So one of the things we need to do is we can obviously add roundabouts, we can reduce the number of lanes, we can add bike lanes, we can improve the buildings, we can increase sidewalk space to really mitigate the effects of these unsafe streets. Most importantly, when it comes to the outward development, we must separate fast-moving and slow-moving, create attractive streets, make sure that houses particularly face the streets, as well as, of course, businesses. We have a lot of storefronts that create a more pedestrian-friendly environment because, again, this system is the foundation that keeps the modern planning sprawl going. Thank you guys so much. I hope you were excited and saw my eye-opening video. If you like what you see, please share and spread the word to the people that you know. Great pleasure.